Hi everyone, I'm a 38-year-old regular Singaporean working a 9 to 6 job in the tech industry. On this channel, I document my journey towards a $4.5 million portfolio by age 50 in 12 years' time. My portfolio currently sits at 538K so far, with 209K in net profits, and has outperformed the S&P 500 over the last 5 years. Now, this is actually my favorite time of the market, when most stocks are down and everyone is scared. And I've actually fired a few large shots into the market recently, and I will continue to do the opposite of everyone running away. So that's just the way I like to operate. Today's episode is going to be another premium deep dive stock analysis based off a newsletter article I wrote at contraturtle.com. For this one, I actually spent weeks researching and writing this up. It's nearly 8,000 words, and I will cover some of the article on this video. But if you want a deeper read into this company, I put a link to the article below, so you can check it out and do your own further due diligence. This is the most extensive research I have published to date on my website. Also, for those who are interested, of course, you can access my latest portfolio moves and the breakdown of my thought process behind each transaction I make, as well as my watch list valuation buy levels. Feel free to subscribe to the premium tier. Anyway, let me start off by sharing some interesting facts for today's episode. So in the last 10 years, right, the top 5 performing stocks have been Nvidia at number 1 with 23,671% in returns, AMD number 2 at 10,358%, Arista Networks at number 4, 2,750%, and finally Broadcom at number 5 with 2,510%. So what do you guys notice about these 4 stocks I've talked about so far? Yeah, they are all related to the current AI semiconductor and data center hype cycle. So this leaderboard, right, that I just showed you guys so far, right, is expected, right, given the boom that we've had with AI. But today's topic and the company in question, right, which is this number 3 stock in this top 5 ranking, this company breaks the pattern on this leaderboard over the last 10 years in a very unexpected way. It is totally unrelated to the semiconductor boom. And this company actually returned 3,005% over the last 10 years, even though it has recently dipped 40% from the highs. The incredible thing is that most investors, right, have never heard of this company before. Some people even mistake it for another oil and gas company because it sounds the same as that. So it's rarely in the headlines, but it has outpaced other high-profile tech names like Palantir or even Google, even after the recent performance. It's outpaced all of these fellas over the last 10 years, simply by dominating a niche market with little competition. Now, I'm going to play all of you a 5-minute video to introduce you to what this company does. It's super important, right, that you patiently watch this full video clip I'm about to share, because later on, I will refer to parts of this video to explain the company's ecosystem and why it has such a strong long-term economic moat. So go and find a nice chill spot and lepak and then take your time to enjoy this part, because it's a little bit like a mini Hollywood movie. And then I'll explain the rest of my investment thesis after the video.
Suspected hit and run. Victim is injured but in stable condition.
Mírame, señor.
Hey, my name is Officer Beckwood. I'm here to help, okay?
Mírame, señor. Solo estaba manejando mi bicicleta y me
Hold
tocó
on.
la...
I'm gonna translate. Did you see the car that hit you?
¿Viste el coche que te atropelló?
Sí, fue un Mustang rojo. Movió y hicimos una derecha.
Yes, a red Mustang was in this. Moved and made a right.
Suspected hit and run driver heading southbound on Bear Parkway in a red Ford Mustang.
Plate number 285, Victor Hotel Echo uniform, last seen traveling westbound on Spring Street. Captain, suspect has a parole violation. 109 is nearby.
Okay, let him know.
Yes, sir.
Car 109 to dispatch.
I have that red hit and run Mustang headed west on Spring Street.
How you doing, sir? Good. I need to see your driver's license, please.
Anything I can help you with, sir?
What we got?
Sir, need to put that back.
911, this is Michael Harris with Secure Solutions Global Security Operations Center. We are currently witnessing a crime in progress at our store location at 1201 North Wilmington. The crime appears to be a robbery in progress.
This is a stolen vehicle.
Let's get a drone out there.
Suspect car located, heading north on Columbus. Suspect is fleeing on foot. Officer arriving on location. Vehicle's empty. Do we have eyes on suspect?
Suspect is fleeing on the east side of the building.
Officer in pursuit of suspect.
Suspect has turned left down the alley.
Stop! Police! Get on the ground! Get on the ground! Put your hands down! Stop where you are! Taser! 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 Suspect down. Taser deployed.
We have an unauthorized drone approaching the stadium downtown from the south. Concert in progress. It's a recreational aircraft.
Pilot located. Car 24 dispatched.
We're good.
Just wrapping up this report.
By now, it's quite obvious. The company which returned 3,005% over the last 10 years, beating all of the Mac 7 except for Nvidia, is Exxon, which often gets confused with the oil company ExxonMobil. So now the question is, can this company continue to generate outstanding returns in the next 10 years? Or is the recent 40% drop a falling knife? Now, most investors or content creators when they start researching a company and then share it on YouTube, straight away, I see on social media also, they start with, the first thing they present is, they start talking about the revenues, the profit margin, the ROIC, cash flows, balance sheets, etc. Right or not? All this financial stuff. But for myself, when I research a company for the purpose of long-term ownership, okay, that's the key. I don't start with all those things that I just mentioned. I start with why the company was created in the first place and its history. I'll give Singaporeans a really simple analogy why this is so important as a long-term growth investor. Let me ask all of you a question. When you go and buy a HDB resale flat or condo, right? The first thing you ask the agent is, what's the flat's history, right? The golden question when you ask the agent, why are they selling? Of course, the price, the location, the level, how many rooms it is, all these factors related to this product, that is the HDB flat or the condo, is important. But you confirm will ask the agent the reason why the person is selling the flat or condo in the first place, right or not? Because beyond the financials and the concrete details of the flat, right, you want to know whether the upstairs neighbor is a bit xiao crazy, maybe he's stomping at night, or if the flat got people commit suicide before and is haunted, or if there's actually a cockroach infestation. Right, so the key here is you're trying to suss out the real motivations of the why behind the sale and the history behind the flat in the first place. Because very often, right, that will also be a deal breaker or a deal maker. So now we come back to this topic of stock investing. Don't you think the same principles should also apply to management's motivations? Because if you're interested in buying a stock, it's just like how you're interested in buying an investment in the form of property. So we know that buying this stock is like how when we buy a HDB or condo, whether or not it is less risky investment long term, because we can better understand why the CEO will continue doing what he has been doing and into the future. Now, with that in mind, we need to go back 32 years ago to examine the history behind why Rick Smith, the CEO, started Exxon and how each of the product lines evolved into what they are today before I even get started on the business and financial analysis. Now, in 1991, right, Rick Smith, the founder, was 21 years old, and two of his high school friends were killed by a gun. And this motivated him to find a less lethal alternative to the firearm. Now, what was weird was that around that time, his mom wanted to get some protection. And so she went to the store and tried to buy a taser instead of a firearm, but was told that the taser was illegal for civilians. Now, a bit of backstory in case you're a bit confused here. Rick Smith did not invent the taser you just saw in the video, which is the shocky tool that they disabled the criminal, right, without killing him. It was invented earlier actually by a guy called Jack Cover, who Rick Smith reached out to collaborate on redesigning the taser together. Now, the reason why Rick Smith's mom, right, couldn't buy the original taser was because at that time, the government department, right, known as the ATF, classified the taser as a firearm. Because the taser back then, the original design, right, it used gunpowder to propel the electric darts towards people. So as long as gunpowder was used, right, they consider it a firearm, even though, right, there are no bullets in the taser. Now, to make matters worse, look at the picture on the right. This is the original taser that Jack Cover invented. It looks like a flashlight. So according to the ATF's categorization back then, right, not only is it a firearm, right, it was a concealed firearm. It's like pretending to be something else. So it made it in a category that was even harder to buy than a lethal firearm. And that's why Rick Smith's mother at that time could not buy a taser. It was actually more difficult to buy a taser than a more lethal firearm. And Rick Smith, he's very clever. He identified that this categorization by the ATF, right, was the main reason why the taser never took off. And so he began redesigning the taser with Jack Cover to use compressed air instead of gunpowder. Now, on the right here, right, is the actual garage that the young Rick Smith was working on the new taser design using air propellant with Jack Cover, which eventually resulted in this thing called the Air Taser 34,000 model, which is the very first redesigned taser that does not use gunpowder. After the taser was created, right, Rick Smith actually traveled to Prague in 1995 to demo the Air Taser to the police force there to prove its capability. But I tell you what, it was damn paiseh and embarrassing because during the demo, right, all 7 volunteers from the police in Prague, right, they were unaffected by the taser. And it turns out, right, that the taser, right, at that time, right, the 34,000 model, right, that they just redesigned and created, right, that taser only had enough power to hit the pain nerves in the skin. So it didn't really go deep enough to just hit the motor nerves to safely paralyze the human muscle. And so this was the first big failure that Rick met with the taser and showed how difficult it was to create a less lethal alternative to the firearm. By then, the company was bleeding money, and Rick tried to pivot to a consumer product known as the auto taser that would electrocute people who tried to steal a car. But the product failed, and he learned that trying to chase a quick buck by solving a problem that doesn't truly matter rarely works for him. So by 1999, the company was almost bankrupt and dependent on a final loan from Rick's father, who bet all his remaining life savings of $500K together with another angel investor. And this was an all-in bet by Rick Smith's family in order to keep the company afloat at that time. This final all-in bet by Rick Smith's family was used to create an improved taser known as the M26, which was the first device to use neuromuscular incapacitation, or NMI for short. So unlike the failed earlier model, right, which is the 34,000 model, the M26 could reach slightly further in to the motor nerves of the skin to override the muscles. So even if the subject can tahan a lot of pain, right, their muscles will still cramp out through electrocution, and so they become immobilized and they cannot move because the muscle contract. So this was the breakthrough that Rick needed with the M26. So, and after this M26 release, right, Rick Smith did the same demonstration. He went around police stations in the US, betting officers $100 that they will be knocked down by the M26, unlike the previous demo. And every one of the officers were knocked down by the taser. But once the darts were removed from their body, right, they got right back up. So the officers had never seen anything like this before. And word started spreading about the taser's effectiveness as a safe way to disable criminals. And this was a huge turning point. And after these demos, right, the company actually tripled revenues for a few years. Now, riding the momentum of the M26, the company went public under the ticker symbol TASR, short for Taser, in 2001, which was their old company name, Taser International. And they were quite lucky in their timing for IPO because remember, around this time, right, the dot-com bubble had just collapsed. And so investors were desperate for companies with real physical products and actual revenue growth, as opposed to a lot of the internet vaporware companies like Pets.com, very famous companies at that time, but they all like jibaboom. And then later that year, as luck would have it, the 9/11 terrorist attacks happened. And so airline companies, right, started to equip aircrafts with the M26 taser because the taser could incapacitate any threat on an airplane without running the risk of puncturing the aircraft, causing decompression in the aircraft cabin like a normal bullet would. So that was a huge advantage that the taser had in the post 9/11 era. And so Taser International actually ended 2001 profitable for the first time, generating $6.8 million in revenue. Then they released the X26, which is an evolved version of the M26 with the same NMI technology, but 60% smaller, so that it was possible for police officers to carry the taser on their belts. Now, the X26 soon became standard issue for law enforcement nationwide in the US. And by the way, I don't know if you all remember, but sometime back at Beach Road, right, there was this incident of this husband who was, he took out a chopper and then he started chopping his wife at the restaurant, right? And then people were like throwing chairs at him to stop him, right? And then the lady kinda hacked until like luncheon meat, right? Then when the police arrived, right, the weapon they actually used to subdue him, right, without killing him, was actually the X26, So Exxon's taser is not just within the US, it is also growing internationally, and Singapore is actually one of the markets. Anyway, at one point, right, in 2005, Wall Street Journal reported that the Taser International was the best performing stock over a 3 and 1 year period. But as we all know, there is no perfect stock, right? Every once in a while, a company will always go through crisis, always. And so as the X26 began to scale, right, a lot of negative news media started flooding the scene, accusing the taser of having poor safety standards. And the SEC, right, even opened an inquiry into Taser International. And as the investigation carried on, right, the stock price collapsed and sales also plummeted because police departments became hesitant to place orders with a company under federal scrutiny. And against his lawyer's advice, right, Rick Smith actually went full transparency mode. He voluntarily walked into the SEC's office and then he said, okay, I'm going to answer all your questions. Any questions you have about the safety data backing the taser, right? You all can feel free to ask me anything. He literally just did that against his lawyer's advice. It was quite a ballsy move, but this ballsy move, right, actually paid off because it shaved off a number of years from the investigation, and it sort of revealed also a bit of Rick's character as someone who believes so strongly in his mission to eliminate the bullet that he was willing to share everything transparently with the authorities. And although Rick managed to clear the SEC investigations, the problems didn't stop there. The company became flooded with lawsuits. Because in America, right, the people there, they love to sue over everything. And a lot of people started to blame the taser for wrongful deaths. And this is an actual screenshot from Exxon's 2006 SEC 10K report showing the 49 lawsuits they were facing at that time. So if you're interested, remember to click into the article link below so you can actually examine this in detail. And as a result of this, all these legal and insurance costs from the lawsuits, right, the net income actually fell 95% in 2005. And through these lawsuits, Rick realized something. In order to protect the officers or any users of the taser or any company that's using the tasers from lawsuits, right, or even Exxon himself, right, they had to have some form of video evidence of what actually happens during taser encounters. And so, the company created the Taser Cam, which eventually evolved into the Exxon Body 4 camera today, which you saw earlier in the earlier video clip. that like auto activates and then starts recording all the scenes on the police officer's chest. The beauty of the body camera, right, is that they have an auto activation function. Whenever the user, right, pulls out the taser from the holster, right, from their belt, right, the body cam would auto activate to capture evidence. And so this development of the body camera, right, became the foundation of the modern Exxon that we know today. Because not only did the cameras reduce the risk of lawsuits to the company and police officers and any users of the taser, it also opened the doors to something that is the most important part of Exxon's financials today, and in my opinion, for the next 10 years. And that is the cloud ecosystem, also known as Exxon Evidence or evidence.com, which they launched in 2009. Now, do you remember from the video clip, we had the body cameras, we also had the in-car fleet camera inside the police car, as well as the drones that they activated to give aerial vision as a first responder to the scene, as well as, in the convenience store. Remember, the convenience store was not a police officer. It was just someone, it was stealing items from the shelf, right? And then the Exxon body workforce, which is for enterprises, it was being worn by the convenience store worker. He actually turned it on, right? So that is not a police officer use case. It's already expanded beyond law enforcement into private enterprise. So anyway, all of this illustrates the Exxon ecosystem expanding because all this evidence, right, whether it's by private enterprise or whether it's by police officers, etc., whether it's in the US, whether it's internationally, they are all in this shared system that is evidence.com. All these cameras and sensors and drones, right, ultimately they feed all their video footage and data all into the cloud storage on evidence.com. And Rick Smith revealed, right, in a recent podcast that this concept was actually inspired by Apple's iPod and iTunes. Yeah, he's that old, right? Because iPod and iTunes at the time. I mean, I also know this iTunes thing. It used to be my generation also. I used to have that. And he said that it inspired him because the body cams and all these sensors, right? These camera sensors, right? To him, it was like the iPod. And then he felt that, okay, we need something like the iTunes. So that's why they created evidence.com, which is the software system and the cloud storage for all the video footage that they were capturing. And this actually creates this very lasting, sticky value like the iTunes. Now in 2017, right, Exxon set a target mission they call their Moonshot goal, which is to reduce gun-related deaths between the police and the public by 50% by 2033. So we have 8 more years to go. But they know they cannot solve this alone. So to achieve this, Exxon is evolving into what we call a platform company by opening up their cloud ecosystem, the software ecosystem, allowing external agencies and partners to plug directly into the Exxon system and build on top of it. Now, this is the exact same playbook that Apple used with the iOS App Store, allowing third-party developers to build iPhone apps on iOS, creating a very sticky ecosystem on the iPhone and the iOS App Store. And it is also the reason why some analysts refer to Exxon as the Apple of public safety. Now that I've gone through the history of Exxon since its founding till today, right, you finally understand how each of the product lines came about and the multiple failures that Rick Smith had to overcome over 32 years in order to build Exxon into what it is today. Now we can finally start to go into the business model, the economic moat, and the financials. Now the way Exxon wins a new business deal, right, is very simple. Every business deal starts with a hardware device like a taser or a body camera or an in-car fleet camera or a drone that they sell to the customer. And then once the customer deploys the hardware device, they then subscribe to Exxon's evidence.com software business to store and manage all the video and data in the cloud. Because every hardware device ultimately feeds data into evidence.com, this cloud part of the business is the strongest lock-in mode in the business. Because once a department's video and data are embedded inside Exxon's ecosystem, right, the switching cost to leave the ecosystem is very big. It will mean that agencies need to migrate like petabytes of videos, logs, and legal documents out of Exxon. Rick Smith even mentioned, right, believe it or not, on a podcast 9 months ago that Exxon, right, stores more video footage, right, than YouTube and Netflix combined. Now, because all roads lead to the cloud software part of the business, right, this is the reason why 43% of the company's revenue is now this higher margin software portion. And it is the single biggest revenue contributor of Exxon, larger than even the taser revenue that they started out with. You can actually consider Exxon is no longer a taser company, it is a software company. In fact, right, software is now the second fastest growing segment of the company, right after what they call platform solutions, which is a far smaller base. Now, even the way Exxon sells their hardware is quite special. What they do is that they bundle the taser and the body camera and the cloud software all into a single subscription package known as an Officer Safety Plan, or OSP for short. And so this is unlike those traditional hardware companies that rely on unpredictable replacement cycles, where customers buy hardware only as and when they need it, right? They just order in bulk as and when ad hoc. And because Exxon bakes in the hardware replacement schedule directly into OSP subscription contracts, it converts this kind of ad hoc episodic hardware sales into a smooth, predictable, recurring revenue, streamlining Exxon's production and also smoothing out the revenue curve. And if we look at this chart over the last 10 years, right, you can see the revenue steadily increasing because of this very streamlined, recurring nature. These orange bars I just highlighted, right, these are all recurring revenue of Exxon due to the OSP kind of subscription contracts. Whereas all the dark blue bars next to the orange bars, that represents the total revenue for each year of Exxon's operation over the last 10 years. So over this period, if you compare the orange part to the black part, right, the percentage of recurring revenues as a percentage of the total revenues grew from 15% at the start to 49%. So nearly half today's total revenues, right, are from recurring revenues from plans at the OSP. And that means that this model, right, is based on a very predictable recurring revenue, locking customers into long-term SaaS-like software-like contracts. And since we're on this topic of recurring revenue, right, one of the most important metrics investors can look at with recurring software kind of revenues is what we call the NRR, or net revenue retention. Now, what NRR means, right, in very simple words, right, is if let's say we assume, right, Exxon, right, starting from today, they just don't expand their customer base. Let's say we fire all their salespeople, okay? We are no longer allowed to sell to new customers, but we have our existing customers, right? Exxon has their existing customers. NRR means, right, if they upsell new products, but only to their existing customer base, how much more money per year can it squeeze more and more from existing customers? And that is the very definition of NRR. And what we find is that without considering new customers, over the last few years, Exxon has increased NRR from 121% to 124% from existing customers. A 3% increase in NRR is a huge deal for companies that deal with SaaS-like recurring revenue. And this NRR's increase over the years is mainly because Exxon can upsell more hardware products like drones after the customers have bought their basic taser and bodycam OSP package, and so on and so forth. And Exxon also recently introduced the AI era plan, where they add additional AI software to the OSP, further increasing this NRR number. One impressive thing is that over the last 15 quarters, right, Exxon has delivered more than 25% year-over-year revenue growth. 25% over 15 quarters. The only exception was in 2021 Q4, when there were two one-offs because there was a tough comparison against the year before of a very big US federal taser order. And then also the second reason was that there was a temporary supply chain constraint that affected the Taser 7 and the Exxon Body 3 production. So that's why during this quarter, it actually fell. But if not for this quarter, right, Exxon would have posted 24 straight quarters of more than 25% growth. Now we move on to the margins. While maintaining high revenue growth, right, Exxon has kept gross margins at 61% and operating margins at 3.78% over the last 40 quarters. Gross margins are one of the ways I numerically assess a company's economic moat, and the fact that it has held steady over the last 40 quarters at over 60% is a good sign. Now, because all roads lead to the higher margin cloud software product, which is now the largest part of the business and also one of the fastest growing segment, right, I actually do expect this gross margin to slowly creep up over time. Another important observation is Exxon's R&D investments, which has averaged about 19% of total revenues over the last 10 years. Now, this is more than double Motorola, who is their closest competitor that I will touch on shortly, and it sits very close to Meta at 21%, which is the highest amongst hyperscalers. And because Exxon is still early in its growth trajectory, right, only recently starting in new markets like drones and AI software, I think this R&D spend is justified and serves as a competitive advantage, allowing Exxon to innovate much faster. Now, there is a caveat with the high revenue growth numbers for Exxon. Remember, no company is perfect. Now, I want to credit one of my investor friends who pointed out to me that in the last few quarters, right, the operating profits and the net income has come down. And the operating cash flows and free cash flows have also come down. So why is there a divergence? in rising revenue versus declining profits and cash flows. So for the cash flows, management reported in the last few quarters, right, that this was because of inventory build-up, where they invested heavily to build inventory to meet the high demand for its new Taser 10 and Exxon Body 4 devices, resulting in a drop in cash flows. So as an investor, right, what I want to see is that after this inventory build-up is done, right, in a couple of quarters, right, cash flows should resume to normalcy. Unless, of course, they perform yet another reinvestment. So it has to be justified. Now, for the drop in the recent profits, right, in the last few quarters, the reason is because stock-based compensation, or SBC for short, has been rising at a pace of 4% median CAGR over the last decade, which is quite a lot. And so this hits the bottom line, right? SBC hits the bottom line, the profits, and also causes share dilution, which is not great for investors. And this dilution, right, is actually one of the top risks people consider before looking into Exxon as an investment. Now, there's a bit of nuance with the SBC. What actually happened was that in 2018, right, Rick was actually inspired by Elon Musk's no-salary performance plan for Tesla. And so he proposed a similar 10-year performance plan for himself, where he took no salary, no cash bonus, and no time-vested equity, and would only be compensated if he hit a number of milestones, such as nearly 10xing the market cap of Exxon, as well as increasing revenues and profits. What is incredible was that by December 2023, just 5 years into the 10-year proposed plan, Rick had already hit all the required milestones, unlocking a huge chunk of SBC. And in 2024, Exxon refreshed this CEO performance plan for 7 years, again depending on performance. And Rick Smith has already hit some of the target goals. And so, as he hit the tranches of the goals from the 10-year plan and the 7-year plan, right, every time he hits a tranche, right, a new block of SBC is unleashed. And that's why it hits the bottom line, and that's why there's a share dilution. So I think in this case, right, it's a bit nuanced, and I think it's justified because the equity award is due to hitting performance instead of time-vested equity, which often happens in tech companies. Even I'm on a time-vested equity plan. I get equity from my RSUs from my tech company that I work in every month. They will ping me, then I get this. It's not based on performance. It's just based on the fact that I'm still in the firm. So I think it's two very different concepts between time vested and performance vested. And in the case of Exxon, it is performance based. So I think it is justified. Now, next, let's talk about the industry Exxon operates in as well as its competitors. In North America, Exxon's Taser product operates in non-lethal weapon, the market, which is expected to reach $4.41 billion in market size by 2033. Exxon's Taser segment by revenues already takes up about 30% of this non-lethal market. And here's the incredible part. If we zoom into just the conducted energy weapon category, right, which is like stun guns, right, Taser has a 95% monopoly in the USA, which means anytime if you're in the US, right, and you see a police officer in the US with a stun gun, right, it is very likely the Exxon Taser. So who are the main competitors in this less lethal category? The first is this company called Bioneer Technologies that does this chemical, irritant, and kinetic impact kind of less lethal weapon. So when you shoot it, I think it's like some chemical smoke or something that, irritates the eyes and the nose or whatever it is. And then the kinetic round is painful, but it doesn't kill people. And they reported 111 million last 12 months revenue, far smaller than the Taser. And the problem with chemical or kinetic disablers is that it once again depends on the pain threshold of the criminals the police are trying to subdue. So if the criminal is high on adrenaline or drugs or just has high pain tolerance and can tahan, the chemical irritants, then this may not reliably stop them. Similar to what happened with the earlier model of the Air Taser 34,000, which failed to knock down police officers in Prague during Rick Smith's first demo session. The next notable competitor is Wrap Technologies with their Bola Wrap restraint device, which is this rope thing that, I don't know if you guys see Batman, he always shoots this thing and then he wraps around the enemy and then it immobilizes them. That's the Bola Wrap. It's a real thing. The issue is that, again, during actual confrontations, being able to reliably aim the rope at the legs or the body accurately at a charging, imagine the criminal charging at you, you got time to go and aim correctly at the Bola Wrap, is a lot more difficult compared to the point and shoot Taser. So in the cameras and sensors section, Exxon has an 85% market share of all body camera deployments in US police departments. Yes, you heard that correct. It has a double monopoly, one with the Taser and another with Bodycams in the USA. Now, if you think about it, the reason is quite straightforward. First, customers usually subscribe to the OSP bundle, which already comes with a taser and body cam for each officer. So that means if you have the taser, you likely also have the body cam. Secondly, the body cam has this function where if the officer pulls out a taser, the body cam auto records to begin, recording how you're using the taser, right? So it's really convenient for police officers to have used both the taser and the body cam at the same time for evidence-taking purposes and to protect officers from lawsuits. Now, Exxon is not alone in this market. Their biggest competitor is Motorola Solutions. Yeah, the Motorola, last time the Tua Ling Kong handphone that we used to use when we were young kids, for you oldies, that Motorola flip phone, right? And now they go through into, they're not in the security business already, right? Police officers and all that. So they have their SVX video remote microphone. It's actually the same as the Exxon Body 4 camera. Now, one advantage that Exxon has over Motorola is that Motorola doesn't have an upstream trigger device like the taser to automatically activate the camera system as I just described earlier on in a sort of end-to-end use of force workflow. So Motorola doesn't have that, but Exxon has that. With body cam plus taser, most police officers who are already on the OSP subscription plan, right, they are likely to use both taser and Exxon body cam instead of, taser and Motorola SVX. It just doesn't make sense. Another thing that, that's the SVX, I forgot to show earlier. Another thing that Motorola has that is super similar to Exxon is that it has this thing called Cloud Command Central software, where any video footage that the SVX Motorola camera takes is auto-uploaded to the cloud. So it sounds exactly the same as what Exxon does with evidence.com. Right, so both companies are also competing on the cloud software layer. Now, Motorola also competes with Exxon on the 911 dispatch layer. I won't go into this one because it gets quite granular. So you can click into the article link in the description below to see my write-up about the 911 dispatch layer competition. But in general, Exxon's revenue growth far outpaces that of Motorola over the last number of years. But I'm watching Motorola's moves very carefully because they, in my opinion, are the main competitor with enough resources to fight Exxon, in my opinion. Next, we come to my favorite part, that is management. Now, after the full 32-year history of Exxon that I've shared, we sort of have an idea of the kind of person Rick is to keep overcoming all the obstacles until today. And the way Rick Smith operates, right, with his team is quite unique. This is from an excerpt from one of the earnings call last year. And in it, he says that Rick Smith, he says he operates with his team, by constantly visiting customers all around the world to listen to customers' problems and then to figure out a solution. And then he sees himself as like a worker bee, bringing back pollen in the form of feedback back to the hive, which is the Exxon HQ. And then he passes this pollen feedback to his CTO and his executive team to execute on his vision. And then he repeats the whole process again and again, constantly meeting customers all around the world and then gathering feedback at the cutting edge. And so if you watch a lot of his earnings calls, right, Rick Smith is always on the move on. He's very, very busy. He the last earnings call, he just came back from Ukraine. From what I heard, I think, if I recall correctly, he was working on some deals for anti-drone technology, which is part of what Exxon does. Apparently, that's very useful for Ukraine. I tell you, in my opinion, right, because I work in technology, right, for 8 years already, and I've seen all kinds of CEO in tech, right, I tell you that this kind of CEO, right, is very rare. Most CEOs, right, they will occasionally meet customers, not every time, and then they will leave the scouting of this wrecking of new ideas or meeting customers for feedback, right, to the product teams to figure out. Usually that's a modus operandi. But Rick is very, very different. He actually loves to go out into the field to keep speaking to customers about their problems, and you can really hear his passion when he talks about some of the people that he meets during his travels. I mean, what kind of CEO, right, will tattoo the own company logo onto the arm? And the best way, right, apart from the earnings calls, right, if you want to get a sense of his passion, right, for the business and technology, right, is to watch this podcast called the Boldly Go podcast, where he shares like the past few decades of stories about Exxon's failures, innovations, and all the breakthroughs. It's really just a bunch of geeks, right, including himself, right, just sitting down around a few chairs, right, and then discussing about very techie stuff. And I tell you something damn funny. Nobody watches it. I mean, look at this screenshot. There's only like 170 subscribers. Even I have more viewership than them in their videos. Each of their videos is like 100 plus viewership. But they still keep doing it as recent as like, I think the last 1 or 2 months. And I think they do it, right, because they're super passionate about the business and they just want to share and record, and just recount the things that they are doing in the business. So it's a really underrated way to have a feel of the management. You should go check it out. And in order to write this article, right, and prepare for this episode, right, I watched all 19 episodes of the podcast. Each episode is more than 1 hour. So that means I watched more than 25 hours, I think, of video footage, just so I can get a sense of Rick Smith and his management team's philosophy. Now, I also want to know, so that's soul in the game, right? We want to qualify, is the CEO, founder running the company now, does he have soul in the game? Does he have the why, his purpose, right? I think that is a higher motivation than money. Firstly, you have to qualify that. Next, of course, we have to still look at the money, okay? So we call this skin in the game, the way I like to look at it. So Rick Smith owns 3.9% of Exxon, and about 94% of his personal net worth is tied directly to Exxon shares. So if Exxon fails, he's screwed personally. And as an investor, this kind of skin in the game is exactly what we want to see, because if the ship sinks, you want the captain to also sink. So you know that he is incentivized to think long term for you as the shareholder, because he himself is a damn big shareholder for his own personal net worth. Now, as with every stock investment, there are always risks. Remember, anyone who tells you a company 100% what big is selling you snake oil or coconut water, confirm one, there's no such thing. Okay, and for me, I believe in this investment philosophy, or just way of thinking, called strong opinions loosely held. You must be able to argue the bear thesis even harder than the bull thesis or whatever investment that you're looking into. And there are a few traps. Before I start talking into some of the risks with Exxon, right? There are a few traps I just want to generally speak about investors, typically like what investors fall into, some of the traps that I observe. Okay, and the first one is what I call sunken cost research bias, which means, for example, this Exxon research, right? I just told you guys, I took damn long, many hours, watch the podcast, read the financial report, go and study the taser history, all these things. But you know what? At the end of the day, even though I put in so much effort, right, it doesn't necessarily mean I must be permanently married to this position. Because if the long-term risks outweigh the investment thesis at any point in time, right, I will immediately close the position. I actually done that before. If you guys follow me very long, the sharp ones will know which position I no longer hold. Just look at some of my earlier videos and then compare it to my recent videos. I think I might make a video of that one day. Actually, I siam quite a big fall. That stock I siam dropped more than 50%. Until now, I haven't recovered. I think more than 1 year already. So thank God for that. But obviously, I didn't make the decision because of short-term reasons. I made it because of long-term reasons, as I'm trying to emphasize here. Okay, so that's the first risk I see. A first trap I see investors falling into, which is sunken cost research bias, right? Doesn't mean you put in a lot of time to study, it means you have to buy. You have to be comfortable with having put in like 50 hours of work, and then at the end of the day decide, oh my God, I think I cannot buy this company. And that's perfectly fine. The second trap I mostly see, right, another kind of bias, right, is public commitment bias. What do I mean by that? Especially as a YouTuber myself, I need to constantly guard against this. Right, someone who announces his positions to the public, right? Or even a simple thing is like, if you're an investor and you tell your friend, right, hey, you never buy this and that stock, you never buy Exxon, you never buy Meta, you never buy, I don't know, Nvidia, you never buy Palantir, whatever it is, okay? The moment you make your position public, right, you tend to get your ego tied up in the position, and you tend to find a lot of confirmation bias. When bad news comes in, you find confirmation biased news to dispute that too easily. So let me make it very clear that at any point for me, right, if I find fundamental news that really changes my long-term view of the companies I hold in my investment portfolio, right, even if I've announced them on YouTube before, transparently, I tell you, I will change my mind immediately. I actually don't really care if people think or drop me comments. So I get some comments like, how come you flip prata or this and that? I actually don't really care. Or that, I've made a mistake previously. I will admit the mistake and I will change the position, right? And I'll tell you why. It's very simple. The truth is that if I combine, right, all the income I get from YouTube and even this subscription newsletter, even my so-called premium subscriber, if I compare it, right, if I just look at it like in a very matter-of-fact manner, right, it's really a very tiny portion compared to my overall portfolio size. It's so small, it's like, I think like 0.1% or some shit. And so to be honest, my portfolio unfortunately comes first before the feelings of my subscribers. I don't want to offend anybody. I mean, I'm still very passionate about doing YouTube. Don't get me wrong. It's just I'm trying to tell you all my incentives so that you all are very clear. Okay, so I will not fall prey to what I call public commitment bias. But I see in some of the social media groups I'm in, the public commitment bias on some investors I observe, right, is very serious. When the tide recedes, right, for some of the positions they hold, right, which it will once in a while, some bad news will hit and then there will be some epic drop. That always there will be companies always go through this phase one, okay? And especially if this kind of hits are very permanent, I fear these kind of people, their egos are so tied to the position, right, it becomes a part of their identity. And by the time they got to let go of the position, right, it's too late already. Okay, so I tell you, I'm very nimble to let go one. But of course, I must first develop a long-term conviction. Strong conviction loosely held is my philosophy. All right, not just suka flip all the time. I assess carefully first the long term. Sorry, I went a really long roundabout thing to just tell you guys. So now I want to talk about the risk of Exxon. And remember, you have to start with the biggest elephant or the biggest risk and try to disprove your own thesis as hard as you can. One of the biggest yellow or red flags of Exxon is that in 2023, Reuters released an investigative report questioning elements of the origin story of the taser of Rick Smith. You guys remember I told at the very beginning, Rick Smith decided, oh my god, I want to go and find a non-lethal alternative because two of my friends got killed in high school and I got so traumatized now I want to find a taser or whatever it is, right? Reuters apparently claims that, right, they wrote here that the siblings of the football players, the two friends who died, who got shot, the siblings of these two people who died, right, come out and said that they did not even know about Rick Smith's narrative until more than 15 years after their brother's death. And apparently Rick Smith wasn't even close to the two people who died. And he didn't even attend the funeral, right? And nor offer a hand during the search for the killer. And then now they're saying that, wow, now Exxon calling them the childhood friends. So basically this report is saying that, wow, it sounds like it's fabricated just to have a marketing angle of, oh, I have this great goal of starting this company because I got so affected by my friends dying, so I want to find a non-lethal weapon. And it sounds like a world-changing kind of goal, right? So this is called into question, right? And that's a pretty big deal, right? I want to start with this right away. I just whack my thesis firstly. Now this article, I highly recommend everyone to read it, because after you read it, right, it will test your conviction, okay? Because it even talks about a lot of things about management, like, they say that Josh Isner, the president, is using the company expenses to go and play golf, and then they sponsor him and this and that. So all kinds of these management problems come in. This article, right, alone, right, I think it's like one of the biggest bear thesis out there. Apart from the SBC problem I talked about earlier on, which I think is justified, it's not as bad. This one, right, is a bit hit and miss, right? It's either whether you trust Reuters, sometimes newspapers, they like to sensationalize, but here the siblings are coming in to make a stand, right? To say that this story might be fake. So this caused to question the management's integrity. The second risk with Exxon as an investment is that it operates in a high risk and regulated industry. And it's very common, right, for it to face regulatory pressure, like what happened with the SEC inquiry that we saw in 2005. Remember the one when they say the taser is not 100% non-lethal because some people, they say it's not safe, right? Which is true, right? There are some people who do get electrocuted and then they die from a heart attack. And I know some people are not comfortable with this kind of investment, right? Even the friend I shared with a couple of days back about Exxon, because with the taser, right, it's a bit grey. It's not as black and white as people think, right? Because there are some accidental deaths from people who get tasered. Obviously, far less than a firearm, and obviously more people get saved than they die through a taser. But this one is very personal opinion lah. Okay, but at least to me, just to me only, personal opinion, don't come hunter me. I think that at the end of the day, right, the world, right, especially in the US, is a dangerous place. Okay, how many of you guys are going to America? Oh my god, there are certain streets you can't even go. Okay, imagine it's just rampant throughout the whole country, all the major cities. The world is not a safe place. So law enforcement, right, will always be needed one. Even in Singapore, right? I mean, even Singapore is the number one safest place, like Japan also, right? How come we still need MATA police, right? Because at the end of the day, there will still be criminals one. Okay, so I'd rather side with the company that is making an effort with a non-lethal weapon while they are subduing criminals, that saves far more lives and also can protect the officers in action compared to using a firearm than it accidentally takes. This is just my opinion. So this is a very great part, and as a result, it has a lot of regulatory risk. And Exxon, not recently, but 3 years ago, there was also this past controversy where in 2022, Rick Smith proposed a taser that is equipped on a drone, like a flying drone, flying around school for school safety. And the reason for that is because, don't you guys remember, a couple of years back, right, there was a lot of these big shootings in American schools. I don't know how these kids, they suddenly got access to this machine guns and what. And they start firing at all the people and killing all the students in the school, right? After these incidents, right, Rick decided to come with this, why don't we have this drone? I deploy it and then you just go around surveilling the school, and then if a student suddenly pops up with a machine gun, just taser this student, then disable him, then we can prevent deaths. Right? It sounds like very geeky thing. Let's just try to fix this problem. That's Rick Smith's point of view. But I think he really went overboard with his geekiness into technology, just trying to solve the problem without realizing that sometimes it's not so black and white, right? There are ethics involved. After he proposed the taser drone, right, for the schools, right, the Exxon's ethics board, they all mass resigned in 2022. So it was a big hoo-ha, okay? So that's one thing, you gotta take note of this company. The kind of industry it operates in is a bit more sensitive and regulated. And finally, because Exxon sells to government agencies, right, it frequently finds itself in the middle of this antitrust situation. Because don't forget, the company has a virtual monopoly over body cams and tasers. So every time when they raise prices, right, the agencies, right, they all got the suck thumb. Because Exxon is just the best at these two hardware. It's just the best. There's no comparison. And that's why a lot of cities, right, they often sue Exxon for antitrust concerns. So in the article, right, you can go and click on this link and you go and look at the lawsuits. It's quite funny one. The cities are actually suing Exxon because they are a monopoly. That's how ridiculously monopolistic they are. Now, finally, the most obvious one. Exxon has key man risks. Okay, Rick Smith is central to Exxon's DNA. And without him as the CEO, I don't think Exxon can do as well as it has done over the past 30 years going forward if he is not CEO. He's like the main reason behind a lot of the company's innovations, and he's already 55 years old this year. So if he ever steps down, which I don't think he will in the short term, he really loves the business, right? If he steps down from this role, right, I think that massively changes the thesis on this company. And from my observations, right, on other management, right, there are no obvious internal successes. I don't even like the current president, Josh Eisner, because during the earnings call, I find Josh Eisner too complacent and cocky. It also doesn't help with all the golfing stuff I shared you early on, right, as the president. And, Rick Smith is just a lot more down to earth. He's more passionate about the technology. He's more interested as a founder to solve problems. So I'm more confident of him being the CEO founder. So I'll be watching his position going forward. Now, the key question, $1 million question. Now that the stock is down 40%, right? The question is, if this is a falling knife, we're trying to catch a falling knife, or is this a value opportunity? So this part of the research I'll share until here, because this video is damn long. I think it's the longest video I've done historically since I started the channel. But if you're interested, feel free to subscribe. And go and read the article first. It's free. Most of it is free. But if you're interested, the part that is more the premium for my premium subscribers is this bottom part where I talk about the 4 growth catalysts and why I believe it is still early days for an Exxon investment. I'll give you a clue. One of it, right, is coming next year, is a huge development in the taser technology, specifically the darts, which has not been seen in over 20 years. The taser has sort of had minor improvements over the last 20 plus years, ever since the M26 NMI technology, the neuromuscular incapacitation. But what they're releasing next year is a huge game changer. Yeah, so I think I'll just keep it at that. So there's huge potential there. So I will also share for premium subscribers my valuation buy levels and whether at the current prices it's an opportunity or a trap, as well as my next portfolio steps related to the company and also like sort of how I value this company and how I view it, which stage of the growth phase it is. Anyway, that's all folks. I hope you enjoyed this episode. This has been the most extensive research I've done and I think it's not even exhaustive. There's still a lot of parts I didn't cover. But you know what? I really enjoy sharing this with everyone. I don't see YouTube as a grind. I really see this more as a long-term passion project for me. And I love to spend time. I spend like quite a lot of time to make this episode, researching everything. I love it. It's great stuff. I think I can carry on doing this until I'm very old. So anyway, have a good weekend, everyone, and may the long-term turtle compounding spirits be with you.